Hello, and welcome to our British Cartographic Society Teatime Talk. My name is Chris Rebutis. I'm the coordinator for the Teatime Talks and today's chair. Today's speaker is Paula Williams, and her talk will be Liketh, loveth, useth, and getteth maps, where she explores how maps have been portrayed in literature. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Paula, where she will tell us more.
Good afternoon, everybody. How lovely to be here and be invited to speak to the British Cartographic Society. I've been a member of the Society for more years than I would care to number, but it has always been a rewarding and wonderful experience, so it's lovely to be with you tonight. As members of the BCS, there's one thing that brings us all together: maps. Together we liketh, loveth, getteth, and useth maps. This gloriously archaic title is taken from the writings of John Dee in his preface to the Elements of Geometry from 1570. Some to beautify their halls, parlours, chambers, galleries, studies, or libraries with. Others some for things past, as battles fought, earthquakes, heavenly firings, and such occurrences in histories mentioned. Thereby lively, as it were, to view the place, the region adjoining, the distance from us, and such other circumstances. Some other, presently to view the large dominion of the Turk, the wide empire of the Muscovite, and the little morsel of ground where Christendom by profession is certainly known. Little I say in respect of the rest, etc. Some other for their own journeys directing into far lands, or to understand other men's travels. Liketh, loveth, getteth, and useth maps, charts, and geographical globes. Obscured by his arcane reputation is Dee's work in the fields of navigation and cartography, encouraging exploration and improving surveying instruments. He was an advocate of the use of mathematics for practical purposes. A man who did himself useth maps. Now, over my years as a lover of maps and as a map curator, I've collected extracts and quotations about maps. So this afternoon, this is my found lecture. It's an anthology of quotations, extracts, and poems, based loosely into categories and illustrated with maps from the time when they were written. And as all maps have to be created, we'll begin with cartography itself, with map making. Maketh maps. Emily Hassler in Cartography for Beginners, published in the Norwich-based poetry journal, the Rialto, in 2013. First of all, you need to choose the correct blue to indicate water. This should not be too watery. You must remember, people do not like wet feet. If there is no water to indicate, no matter. You must still elect a blue. Let me recommend eggshell, at a push azure. Choose a symbol for church, temple, mosque, synagogue. Choose a symbol for a pub. Dedicate your life to the twin and warring gods of precision and wild abandon. People do not like to be lost. Buy Mandelbrot's 1967 paper on the coastline paradox. Put it on the highest shelf, but get a stepladder. Take a little license with rivers, especially their curves and estuaries. Add an oxbow lake if at all possible. If the area you are mapping has no seas, lakes, rivers, streams, I have to question, why are you bothering? You won't get to use that lovely blue that you spent so long deciding upon. Do the Norfolk Fens instead. Better yet, East Anglia in its future state, quite utterly submerged like a sodden constable. Come on, get your coat, I'll show you. You won't need your shoes. Kei Miller from The Cartographer tries to map a way to Zion in 2014. But there are maps. And then again, there are maps. For what to call the haphazard dancing of bees returning to their hives, but maps that lead to precise hibiscuses, their soft storehouses of pollen. And what to call the blood of hummingbirds, but maps that pulse the tiny bodies across oceans and back. And what are turtles born with, if not maps that break eggs and pull them up from the sand, guide them towards ocean instead of land? Jonathan Swift, on Poetry, 1733. Though geographers in Afric maps with savage pictures fill their gaps, and o'er uninhabitable downs place elephants for want of towns. Now, I'm guessing that everybody here today liketh maps, but there are many reasons for liking them, and each of us will have our own personal ones. Robert Louis Stevenson, in An Inland Voyage in 1878. I've always been fond of maps, and can voyage in an atlas with the greatest enjoyment. The names of places are singularly inviting. The contour of coasts and rivers is enthralling to the eye, and to hit in a map upon some place you have heard before makes history a new possession. So maps are about time as well as place. And of course, in Treasure Island, I am told that there are people who do not care for maps and find it hard to believe. The names, the shapes, the courses of the roads and rivers are an inexhaustible fund of interest for any man with eyes to see or tuppence worth of imagination to understand with. Wisława Szymborska, 2014. Flat on the table it's placed on. Nothing moves beneath it, and it seeks no outlet. Above, my human breath creates no stirring air and leaves its total surface undisturbed. Its plains, valleys are always green. Uplands, mountains are yellow and brown, remain a kindly blue beside the tattered shores. Everything here is small, near, accessible. I can press volcanoes with my fingertip, stroke the poles with thick mittens. I can, with a single glance, encompass every desert with the river lying just beside it. A few trees stand for ancient forests. You couldn't lose your way among them. In the east and west, above and below the equator, quiet like pins dropping, and in every black pinprick, people keep on living. Mass graves and sudden ruins are out of the picture. Nations' borders are barely visible, as if they wavered to be or not. I like maps because they lie, because they give no access to the vicious truth, because good-heartedly, good-naturedly, they spread before me a world not of this world. And again, Kei Miller, in praise of maps. Him then, a song in praise of maps, without which we could not dream the shape of countries, the boot of Italy, the number 7 of Somalia, without which we could not trace the course of rivers, feel a papery Mississippi beneath our fingers, without which pirates would string nylon down the necks of useless shovels, play them each night as banjos, without which submarines would beach themselves like omens, rusting mermaids on arbitrary beaches, without which we would walk nomadic distances, give up the language of men and learn the geckering of foxes. We would negotiate with them each evening a soft space in their dens. And then beyond liking maps, some people loveth maps. It's Charles Baudelaire in The Voyage in 1909. For the child in love with maps and prints, how wide is the world by lamplight. Bill Bryson, neither here nor there, travels in Europe in 1991. And here he's giving an account from his travels through Europe from Hammerfest in the north to Istanbul on the brink of Asia. I returned to England and waited for winter to go. I spent an absurd amount of time shopping for things for the trip. A travel alarm clock, a Swiss army knife, a bright green and yellow rucksack, and spent a day crawling around the attic searching for my beloved Cummerly and Frey maps. I bought nearly the whole European set in 1972, and it was one of the few intelligent investments of my younger years. What am I saying? It was the intelligent investment of my younger years. Printed in Switzerland with all the obsessive precision and expense that implies, each Cummerly and Frey map covered one or two countries within its smart blue and yellow folders. Unfolded, they were vast and crisp and beautifully printed on quality paper. Best of all, the explanatory notes were in German and French only, which gave them an exotic ring that appealed to me in 1972 and appeals to me still. There's just something inherently more earnest and worldly about a traveller who carries maps with titles like Yugoslavian and Schwarzwald. It tells the world, don't mess with me, I'm a guy who knows his maps. People love maps. They love all kinds of maps, and maps can even be an expression of love. John Donne, The Good Morrow, 1633. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone. Let maps to other worlds on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world. Each hath one and is one. My face in thine eye, thine in mine appears, and true plain hearts do in the faces rest. Where can we find two better hemispheres, without sharp north, without declining west? Some of the most thrilling appearances in literature are where the maps are got or first discovered by our hero, where they getteth the maps. They reveal a way forward or disclose a secret. And of these, one of the best known is the map from Treasure Island. This is the map which appeared in every edition of the book since its first appearance in Robert Louis Stevenson's book in 1883. The paper had been sealed in several places with a thimble by way of a seal. The very thimble, perhaps, that I had found in the captain's pocket. The doctor opened the seals and with great care, and there fell out the map of the island, with latitude and longitude, soundings, names of hills, and bays and inlets, and every particular that would be needed to bring a ship safe to the anchorage upon its shores. It showed an island about 9 miles long and 5 across, shaped, you might say, like a fat dragon standing up, and had 2 fine landlocked harbours, and a hill in the centre part marked the Spyglass. There were several editions of a later date, but above all 3 crosses of red ink, 2 on the north part of the island, 1 on the southwest, and beside this last in the same red ink, and in a small neat hand, very different from the captain's tottery characters, these words: bulk of treasure here. I brooded by the hour together over the map, all the details of which I well remembered. Sitting by the fire in my housekeeper's room, I approached that island in my fancy from every possible direction. I explored every acre of its surface. I climbed 1,000 times to that tall hill they called the Spyglass, and from the top enjoyed the most wonderful and changing prospects. Sometimes the isle was thick with savages with whom we fought, sometimes full of dangerous animals that hunted us, and in all my fancies nothing occurred to me so strange and tragic as our actual adventure. And later in the story, Long John's eyes burned in his head as he took the chart, but by the fresh look of the paper I knew he was doomed to disappointment. This was not the map we had found in Billy Bones' chest, but an accurate copy, complete in every particular, names and heights and soundings, with the same single exception of the red crosses and the written notes. Sharp as must have been his annoyance, Silver had the strength of mind to hide it. Now, it's interesting, given how well known the map is. It is only mentioned in the book these 3 times, and yet it's so pivotal to the story. The map to the Lonely Mountain in The Hobbit is similarly well known, and yet again only appears briefly. There seems to be an assumption that it's carried by the band of dwarven adventurers and regularly consulted. Such use of the map is taken as a given and doesn't need to be mentioned. Fantasy stories often rely heavily on accompanying maps to enhance the reader's understanding of the unfamiliar setting of the novel. Integrating the map itself into the tale helps the reader feel immersed and almost creates a sense of belonging. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit, 1937. And this map appeared in the hardback editions in the end papers, one at the front with the Lonely Mountain, and then the other was the realms of the Middle Earth, which gave the locations and the context to the adventures of the Hobbit. On the table in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he, Gandalf, spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. "This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin," he said in answer to the dwarf's excited questions. "It is a plan of the mountain." "Don't see that this'll help us much," said Thorin disappointedly after the glance. "I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is and where the Withered Heath, where the great dragon's bred." "There's a dragon marked in red on the mountain," said Balin. "It'll be easy to find him without that if we ever arrive there." "There is one point you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is the secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side, on the hand pointing to it with the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of the book, and you'll see there the runes." "Well, it may have been a secret once," said Thorin, "but how do we know that it's secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about these caves." "Well, he may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it's too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast, say the runes, but Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, and even when he was a young dragon, certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale." "Seems a great big hole to me," squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in this hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favourite marks walked upon it in red ink. The magical properties of the map, with its moon runes, are echoed in the more recent creation, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which is the 3rd book in the series. And at this stage of the story, without a signed pass, Harry Potter is forced to stay in the school rather than join his classmates on a trip to nearby village of Hogsmeade. His friends take pity on him. Fred pulled something from inside his cloak with a flourish and laid it on one of the desks. It was a large, square, very worn piece of parchment with nothing written on it. Harry, suspecting one of Fred and George's jokes, stared at it. "What's that supposed to be?" "What do I need a piece of old parchment?" said Harry. "How do you work it?" George took out his wand, touched the parchment lightly, and said, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." And at once thin ink lines began to spread like a spider's web from the point that George's wand had touched. They joined each other, they crisscrossed, they fanned into every corner of the parchment. The words began to blossom across the top in great curly green words that proclaimed, "Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs, purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauder's Map." It was a map, showing every detail of the Hogwarts castle and grounds. But the truly remarkable thing was the tiny ink dots moving around it, each labelled with a name in minuscule writing. Astounded, Harry bent over it. A labelled dot in the top left corner showed that Professor Dumbledore was pacing in his study. The caretaker's cat, Mrs. Norris, was prowling the 2nd floor, and Peeves the poltergeist was currently bouncing around in the trophy room. "Right," said George briskly. "Don't forget to wipe it after you've used it." "Or anyone can read it," Fred said warningly. "Just tap it again and say, 'Mischief managed,' and it'll go blank." The Marauder's Map is a cunning plot device to enable Harry to bypass the rules, and as with many Hogwarts creations, it appears again in the following novels and is put to good use. The map discovered by the hero of the next book, though, serves a different purpose. It is less a revelation than an education, a way to show understanding and knowledge. This is Mary Stewart, The Crystal Cave, in 1970. The Crystal Cave is the first in a trilogy following the story of young Merlin or Merlin Imris. And they form part of their Arthurian story, which was an international bestseller and a classic of fantasy literature. The book is set in the 5th century, so it's interesting to speculate exactly which map Merlin might have seen. I was used to diagrams and drawings, but this was a drawing of nothing I could recognise. The writing was in Latin, and I saw the words Ethiopia and Fortunate Islands, and then, right out in a corner, Britannia. The lines seemed to be scrawled everywhere, and all over the picture were trails of mounds drawn in, like a field where moles have been at work. Those are they mountains? Yes. Then it's a picture of the world. A map. I'd never seen a map before. At first I could not see how it worked, but in a while, as he talked, I saw how the world lay there as a bird sees it, with roads and rivers like the radials of a spider's web or the guidelines that lead the bee into the flower. As a man finds a stream he knows and follows it through the wild moors, so with a map it's possible to ride from Rome to Massilia or London to Caerleon and without once asking the way or looking for the milestones. This art was discovered by the Greek Anaximander, though some say the Egyptians knew it first. The map that Gallopus showed me was a copy from a book of Ptolemy in Alexandria. After he'd explained and we'd studied the map together, he bade me get out my tablet and make a map for myself of my own country. And of course, having made maps, we have to use the maps. Robert Herrick and the Country Life of 1893. But thou at home without tide or gale canst in thy map securely sail, seeing those painted countries and so guess by those fine shades her substances, and from thy compass taking small advice, buys travel at the lowest price. Perhaps the most predictable use of maps in literary works is by travellers, where the map may inspire the writer to venture forth. Sometimes, though, the maps themselves become almost a companion to the wanderer, although not always a helpful one. Bill Bryson, again, in his Notes from a Small Island, 1995. I went over to the stone bench that had been thoughtfully conveyed to this lofty summit for the benefit of weary chaps like me. And it really is extraordinary how often you encounter some kindly gesture like this in Britain. And I took out my Ordnance Survey 1 to 25,000 map of Purbeck. Now, as a rule, I'm not terribly comfortable with any map that doesn't have a "you are here" arrow on it somewhere, but the Ordnance Survey maps are in a league of their own. Coming from a country where map makers tend to exclude any landscape feature smaller than, say, Pikes Peak, I'm constantly impressed by the richness of detail on the OS 1 to 25,000 series. They include every wrinkle and divot of the landscape, every barn, milestone, wind pump and tumulus. They distinguish between sand pits and gravel pits and between power lines strung from pylons and power lines strung from poles. They even included the stone seat on which I sat now. It astounds me to be able to look at a map and to know to the square metre where my buttocks are deployed. Some fictional characters lend themselves to being map users, and one such being, of course, Sherlock Holmes. With such an analytical mind, it's no surprise that it's demonstrated in his use of maps. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, Arthur Conan Doyle, 1902. There's a delightful freshness about you, Watson, which makes it a pleasure to exercise any small powers which I possess at your expense. Where do you think I have been? A fixture also? On the contrary, I have been to Devonshire. In spirit? Exactly. My body has remained in this armchair and has, I regret to observe, consumed in my absence 2 large pots of coffee and an incredible amount of tobacco. After you left, I sent down to Stanford's for the ordnance map of this portion of the moor, and my spirit hovered over it all day. I flatter myself that I could find my way about. A large-scale map, I presume? Very large. He unrolled one section and held it over his knee. Here you have the particular district which concerns us. That is Baskerville Hall in the middle. Of course, one of the difficulties of using paper maps is their sheer physicality, their size and unwieldiness. And this, I think, adds to their strangeness and mystery. There's nothing more exciting than creaking open a heavy, huge old atlas to be transported into another world, or gently unrolling a wall map inch by inch to see the land laid below you as if you're on a cloud. Folded maps, on the other hand, cause different problems. J.M. Barrie. Shutting a map in an Auld Licht Manse and Other Sketches, 1893. Prominent among the curses of civilization is the map that folds up convenient for the pocket. There are men who can do almost everything except shut a map. It is calculated that the energy wasted yearly in denouncing these maps to their face would build the Eiffel Tower in 13 weeks. And of course, sometimes we have to go beyond the map. And I think it's really difficult for us today to conceive of going beyond the edges of the map. When we have maps with us at all times tucked into our pockets on our phones, to not know what is beyond the horizon is almost unimaginable. It seems brave, if not foolhardy, to go off the map. But that's exactly what happens. Here, the BFG 1982 Roald Dahl. In the leading machine, the head of the Air Force was sitting beside the pilot. He had a world atlas on his knees, and he kept staring, first at the atlas and then at the ground below, trying to figure out where they were going. Frantically, he turned the pages of the atlas. "Where the devil are we going?" he cried. "I haven't the foggiest idea," the pilot answered. "The Queen's orders were to follow the giant, and that's exactly what I'm doing." The pilot was a young Air Force officer with a bushy moustache. He was very proud of his moustache. He was also quite fearless, and he loved adventure. He thought that this was super fun. "It's fun going new places," he said. "New places?" shouted the head of the Air Force. "What the blazes do you mean, new places?" "Well, the place we're flying over now isn't in the atlas, is it?" the pilot said, grinning. "You're darn right it isn't in the atlas," cried the head of the Air Force. "We've flown clear off the last page." "Well, I expect the old giant knows where he's going," the young pilot said. "He's leading us to disaster," cried the head of the Air Force. He was shaking with fear. In the seat behind him, the head of the army was even more terrified. "You don't mean to tell me we've gone right out of the atlas?" he cried, looking forward to look. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," cried the Air Force man. "Look for yourself. Here's the very last page of the whole flaming atlas. We went off it 2 hours ago." And he turned the page. As in all atlases, there were 2 completely blank pages at the very end. "So now we must be somewhere here," he said, putting a finger on one of the blank pages. "Where's here?" cried the head of the army. The young pilot was still grinning broadly. He said to them, "That's why they always put 2 blank pages at the back of the atlas. They're for new countries. You're meant to fill them in yourself." And the best blank map, Lewis Carroll, Hunting of the Snark, 1893. He had bought a large map representing the sea without the least vestige of land, and the crew were much pleased when they found it to be a map they could all understand. What's the good of Mercator's North Poles and Equators, tropic zones and meridian lines, so the bellman would cry, and the crew would reply, they're merely conventional signs. Other maps are such shapes with their islands and capes, but we've got our brave captain to thank. So the crew would protest. He's bought us the best, a perfect and absolute blank. I hope you've enjoyed a brief romp through some mentions of maps in literature. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Paula, for that. That's been a very interesting talk that we've had. So now we'll move on to the Q&A session. Yes, I have to say it was very interesting having the the vast multitude of maps that we've that you've gone through for all the different fictional worlds.
Only some of them. There are many, many more.
Yes, it is nearly limitless what you can find in all these these books. And we've got some questions that have just come in there. Okay, so Oh, it looks like it's going to be reading quotes then.
It is. Go for it.
Okay, right. So, excellent. Thank you, Paula. My favorite quote. Now, when I was a little chap, I had a passion for maps. I would look for hours at South America or Africa or Australia and lose myself in all the glories of exploration. At that time, there were many blank spaces on Earth, and when I saw one that looked particularly inviting to me on a map, but they all looked like that, I would put my finger and say, when I grow up, I will go there. That's Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. You already know where it's all going.
I already know this one because it's in the long version of this lecture. There's an hour-long version as well, and of course Joseph Conrad isn't there because the hero goes off to Africa to a black mark on the map.
Okay, so how did you find all your reference maps? I've a good question to ask there.
Excellent question. Because I knew the date of the quotation, once I made the decision to look for maps that were of appropriate kind of date to go with the writing, then it was fairly straightforward to find things. Some of them you'll guess come from the National Libraries of Scotland's own collection, and some are open source from the interweb. So it was just a bit of rummaging around. The only one that I had to kind of make, I suppose, was the Waggle Dance one, which was based on a old image of the bee with the Waggle Dance drawn on top.
Now I have to say this, the next comment we'll have is actually quite true. It's an excellent, completely lost in listening. And yes, it was a very it was a talk that you can genuinely get lost in listening to. It's just with both the visual aids and the quotations that were coming from it. It was a very, very enjoyable talk to listen to over. And I'm now curious what the hour-long version's like.
Well, all of this, but with more.
If ever a tea time talk was appropriate for wider broadcast, that was it.
Thank you.
Yes. And when did you begin this fantastic poetic journey?
I started gathering map quotations when I first became a map curator when I was at the Bodleian in the 1990s-ish, and just collected them in a Word document, no more than that. And I was asked if I could do a talk, something to do with maps and literature, for a literature society here in Edinburgh, and this was what I put together. The Liketh, loveth, useth, getteth seemed like such a neat way to divide them up that it gave the kind of structure for it to start with, and then it was just a case of finding things that fitted into those kind of sequences. So there's probably, I mean, there's more than enough to do another whole thing, but an hour was what they wanted, so that's what they got.
I have to say, yes, it makes a lot of sense that it all starts really at the Bodleian with their
yes, of course.
Considering I've seen some of their, I remember seeing their exhibition back at the very beginning of 2020 when they had a lot of their a lot of story maps that were available. They had a lot of maps, including a lot of the maps from their collection from Tolkien, and
yeah,
along those lines as well. Quite a few of them, which is a nice start. So another good question: what is your favourite one?
Oh, they're all so lovely. I have to say, in terms of reading, I really like the BFG. It's just good fun, where they go off the end. In terms of, I think the poems are really interesting. So the modern poems, I really like the description. I'm just going back to find her name. The one that, yeah, there we go. Wisława Szymborska's one that was published in the New Yorker that describes maps of being not of this world, or a world not of this world. That I really like the concepts of that. I think it's really interesting. that all maps are fiction, effectively.
Yeah. Okay. So another wonderful talk. Thank you. And what is your absolute favorite fictional map? I know you've said the BFG, but that's literally goes off the page.
It does. I'm a bit of a Tolkien fan. It's probably all that Oxford stuff. But I was a Tolkien fan before I went to, maybe that's why I went to Bodleian actually. So I have to say that the Lonely Mountain, because he drew them himself, I really like as a thing. I think they're just beautiful, and they've kind of sparked an entire fantasy world industry. So I think they're kind of the original and best in terms of fantasy stuff.
No, I would have to agree myself. I've got some of the maps lying around. I've got some of the maps, including a fairly large copy of the Lonely Mountain sitting somewhere at the side. It's yes, things you have to grab hold of when you see them, because it's really one of the key starting points of a lot of these of fictional maps in that genre. I think it's really one of the key cornerstones of a lot of them. Okay, so we've got comments that yes, people would love to hear the longer version, and potentially a part 2 sometime of this. I'm sure we can probably twist our arm at some point in the future to give a long version, but we'll have to see.
Indeed.
Yes, yes, I have to say. Okay, so yes, that's been quite a few questions there. A lot of support for a lot of support for a longer version. I think that's. I think we're all agreed on that one. Thank you very much for joining us today. I want to thank once again Paula for the talk. Next month's talk will be from Kirsty McLean on her current project in the talk, Bringing Historical Maps into the 21st Century, Restoring the Bartholomew half-inch maps of Britain. We look forward to seeing you in the future, but for now, thank you and goodbye.